My name is Ellie Matthews, and 7 years after being thrown out like trash, I stood in a Chicago courtroom and made my father, read out loud the eviction letter he wrote me at 18. I didn't flinch. Not when his voice cracked. Not when my lawyer held up the photos of the duffel bag he'd hurled at my feet and the journal I kept the night he locked the door behind me. I made him own what he did. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, because this story might hit closer to home than you think. The kitchen smelled like burned eggs, not that I was hungry. My appetite had vanished the moment I walked in and saw the duffel bag. I froze in the doorway. Dad Michael technically stood near the fridge, arms crossed, jaw set tight like it always was when he'd made up his mind. On the cracked linoleum beside him sat my only suitcase, half-zipped, already packed. The bag I usually kept under my bed. The one I hadn't touched in months. "What is this?" I asked, my voice tight. My heart knew the answer, but my brain refused to accept it. He didn't respond, just nudged the bag with his foot so it toppled over and spilled my sketchbook across the tile. That sketchbook had my college portfolio in it. "Pick it up," he muttered, "and get out." My body went ice cold. "What?" Mom leaned in from the hallway, arms crossed over her worn cardigan, eyes unreadable. She didn't come closer. "I didn't do anything wrong," I said, louder this time. "Why are you doing this?" Dad finally turned to look at me. "You want the truth, Ellie. You were never ours, and now you're someone else's problem." A sound escaped my mouth, half laugh, half cry. "Are you serious? After everything, I've lived here since I was 6. His lips curled into something bitter. "And you've been ungrateful ever since." That was a lie. I cooked dinner 3 nights a week. I worked double shifts at the diner so I wouldn't have to ask them for anything. I did their taxes last spring. Ungrateful. "I'm still in high school," I said, hating how small my voice had got. "Where am I supposed to go?" He walked over to the front door, opened it wide, and nodded at the dark, frozen street outside. "Figure it out," he said. My feet didn't move. My ears rang. I kept waiting for Mom to step in. To say, "Michael, stop, or this isn't how we handle things." But she just watched, silent, like she always was when it counted most. "I didn't steal from you," I said, tears springing up without permission. "I didn't lie, I didn't sneak out. You're throwing me out because what? Because I told the counselor I wanted to apply to college out of state." Dad slammed the doorframe with his palm, the sound loud enough to make me flinch. "This isn't a debate, Ellie. Take your junk and go. You're 18 now. You can take care of yourself." He disappeared into the living room. A moment later, I heard the deadbolt click from the inside. I stood there, breath fogging in the February air, duffel bag at my feet and silence all around. No goodbyes, no last-minute change of heart, no family, just me, a few hundred in savings, and the snow falling like ash across our rundown block in Rockford, Illinois. I don't know how long I stood there. Maybe 5 minutes. Maybe 20. I didn't cry right away. My body wouldn't let me. Instead, I bent down, zipped the bag, wiped my eyes on my sleeve, and whispered the words that would carry me through the years to come. "I won't ever come back here. Not for anything." And I didn't. The apartment wasn't much. The ceiling cracked like it was recovering from something. The paint on the walls flaked off in strips the color of old newspaper, and the heater wheezed every time it kicked on, like it resented having to work for anyone, least of all a teenager with $642 in cash and no cosigner. But it had a door that locked, a mattress on the floor, and a window that faced the street. For now, that was enough. I found it 2 blocks from school through a waitress at the diner, Patty, who smoked so much her laugh came out in gravel. "I know a guy who'll rent it under the table," she said. "Real old school, doesn't ask questions if you don't give him any answers." That sounded exactly like what I needed. He was an older man named Mr. Delano. He squinted at me for a long time when I met him on the icy sidewalk, like he couldn't decide whether I was a tenant or a runaway. "You working?" he finally asked. I nodded. "Diner 4 nights a week, Saturdays too." He gave a grunt that might have been approval. "Don't cause trouble, keep the water bill low, don't let the roaches win." And with that, I had a place of my own. I spent the first night curled under a thin blanket on the floor, jacket zipped, wearing every pair of socks I owned. The silence was loud in a way I hadn't expected, empty, echoing silence. No footsteps overhead, no shouting, no clinking plates. Just my own breathing and the wind slicing through the gap in the bathroom window. But there was a peace in it too. A strange kind of freedom. Like I'd stepped out of a cage and didn't yet know how to fly, but at least the bars weren't around me anymore. In the corner, I counted out my stash, mostly cash tips from the diner rolled tight and stored inside a hollowed-out book. I'd been saving since I was 15. Secretly, quietly, for something, though I hadn't known it would be this. $463 after rent. I whispered to the ceiling, I won't ever need them again. Not Michael, not Marion, not their conditional love. Not even their approval. I didn't cry, not that night. My body was still locked in survival mode. But I lay awake, imagining what it would feel like to wake up one day and not have to brace myself, to live without fear of being too loud, too smart, too opinionated, to be wanted. The next morning, I pulled on my diner uniform and walked to school like nothing had changed. Nobody asked why I looked more tired than usual. Nobody noticed the frostbite blooming on my fingertips or the bruise on my shoulder from hauling the duffel bag up the stairs. At lunch, I sat alone. Same as always. But I had my sketchbook back, that was enough. After school, I worked the late shift, poured coffee, wiped counters, smiled through aching cheeks. Patty asked no questions, just handed me a leftover meatloaf sandwich in wax paper and said, "Eat this before you pass out." "Thanks," I said, voice hoarse from the cold. "You on your own now?" She asked casually, not looking up. I hesitated. "Yeah," she didn't blink. "Good, then you're not waiting for anybody to save you." That night I washed my hair in the apartment sink, then sat on the floor and drew until my fingers went numb. I sketched the diner, the apartment, the streets at night. I drew my mother's face from memory and then drew over it, changing the eyes, softening the jaw, until it no longer looked like her at all. It looked like someone I hadn't met yet. Someone who might still love me. I wasn't angry yet, not really, not at them, not even at myself, I was just empty. Like someone had scooped out the inside of me and left the shell behind, full of scraped edges and echoes. But there was something forming inside that shell now. A flicker, a promise. If no one was going to protect me, then I would have to become the kind of person who didn't need protection. Someone who could survive this. No, someone who could grow from it. 7 years disappeared fast. It was strange, really. How quietly time moves when no one's watching you. I became invisible, just another girl refilling coffee in a West Coast diner, showing up to shifts, paying rent on time, staying out of trouble. I had my routine, my studio, my little world. And I liked it that way. Until the day my jaw swelled up like a grapefruit and forced me into the world again. I didn't even want to go to the hospital. I hated hospitals. The smell. The sounds. Way people looked at you like you were a puzzle to be solved, not a person in pain. But the ache had turned sharp by the third day. And my boss, Myra, all but dragged me out the door. "Either you go," she warned, "or I'm calling an ambulance and making a scene." So I walked 5 blocks in the late afternoon sun, clutching my chin like it might fall off. The emergency room at San Diego General was packed, full of crying toddlers and miserable tourists who underestimated the city's jalapeno obsession. The receptionist had a pink scrunchie on her wrist and a name badge that said Trina. She asked for my ID and insurance. I handed her both. Then she asked for my social security number. Sure," I said, wincing as I said it. I'd only memorized it out of necessity. She typed it in, eyes half-lidded with boredom. Then she froze. Her fingers stopped mid-keystroke. Her gaze sharpened like a scalpel. "Is something wrong?" I asked, shifting uncomfortably. The ache in my face was pounding now. She didn't answer. She just leaned forward, squinting at the screen. Her tone changed completely. "Can you hang tight 1 second?" I felt the chill before the air conditioner kicked in. "Ma'am," I asked, my voice thinner than I wanted. Trina pressed her lips together and stood. "Don't go anywhere, someone will be with you shortly." 15 minutes passed. Then 20. No one called my name. Instead, a man in scrubs came to the waiting area and whispered something to Trina, who pointed directly at me. He looked over slowly, too slowly, like I was a painting he had to study. That was when the knot in my stomach turned to a boulder. Another 10 minutes. Then 2 uniformed officers entered from a side door, not hospital security. These men wore dark jackets, badges clipped to their belts, expressions unreadable. One leaned down and said quietly, "Miss Matthews, Ellie Matthews?" I blinked. "Yes, come with us." They didn't cuff me, not yet. But their presence felt like a noose tightening, one thread at a time. I just have a swollen jaw," I said, unsure whether to laugh or cry. I didn't do anything." The taller one gave a small nod, like that part didn't even matter. As they led me through the sliding glass doors into a corridor full of humming machines and fluorescent lights, The air around me thickened into something suffocating. That's when the shorter one turned to me and said, almost gently, "You've been wanted by Interpol for 25 years. I blinked. What? Interpol, there's a flag on your social. You've been missing since 1998. My jaw stopped hurting altogether. I think you have the wrong person, I said, laughing nervously. I'm from Illinois, I'm nobody, I work at a diner, I pay my taxes, I've never even left the country. The officer raised an eyebrow. Your adoptive parents didn't mention this to you. My heart dropped. My, what? He exchanged a glance with his partner. You didn't know you were adopted? I shook my head slowly, as if doing it gently might stop the ground from opening beneath me. Okay, the taller one muttered under his breath. She really doesn't know. They didn't explain much after that. They didn't arrest me, not formally. But they put me in a small white room with a closed door and no windows, and told me to sit still while they made some calls. I wasn't allowed my phone. My mind ran laps, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. Interpol, adopted, missing since 1998, I was born in 1998. That would have made me an infant, a baby. None of it added up. None of it could be true. And yet, the look on their faces. The way they handled me like I was glass, fragile, cracked, and valuable all at once, told me it wasn't a mistake. I sat on the hard plastic chair, staring at the fluorescent flicker above me. And all I could think was, if I wasn't who I thought I was, then who am I? The doctor didn't even look at me when he entered, just at the chart in his hand, then at the two officers flanking the door. His face went pale so fast it was like he'd seen a ghost. She's the one, he asked, voice cracking. The officer nodded. The doctor backed away, knocking into a rolling tray with a clatter. Call the police, he barked. Now, my stomach dropped. I'm right here, I said, raising my hands instinctively. I'm not dangerous, I swear, I came in with a toothache. But nobody listened. A nurse scrambled for the wall phone. Another locked the door behind the officers as though that would keep me contained. I think you're making a mistake, I tried again, but my voice sounded muffled, buried under their panic. The shorter officer approached with gentle firmness. Ellie, sit. I'm not a dog, I snapped. Fear had teeth now, it was biting into every breath, he softened. We're trying to keep you safe, just sit. Safe, from what, from whom? Before I could argue, two more officers arrived, local police this time, radios buzzing, hands hovering near cuffs. They didn't ask questions, didn't check my ID, didn't ask if maybe, just maybe, the hospital had mixed up a record. One said, take her. And that was that. They shackled my wrists. Cold metal, too tight, I gasped. Why are you doing this? I didn't commit a crime. The officers exchanged looks, sympathetic but distant. The sympathy hurt more, like they believed I wasn't dangerous but was still something fragile that needed locking away. Ma'am, the female officer said, we don't have the authority to explain. Orders are federal. Federal? My laugh came out broken. I'm a waitress. What federal involvement could I possibly? She repeated, shutting the question down. And then I was escorted through side hallways, past the beeping machines, past curious nurses behind plexiglass. People stared like I was some urban legend finally caught. When they brought me outside, the sun was too bright. I blinked through it until the world sharpened into an image that turned my stomach, a transport bus. The kind used for prisoners. Already half loaded with people in orange jumpsuits, hard faces, hollow eyes, bodies slumped in defeat. One man stared at me openly, confused, probably wondering what a girl in jeans and a diner t-shirt was doing there. I wondered the same thing. A guard lifted my elbow. Watch your step. I climbed in, the metal stairs clanging under my feet like gongs announcing the death of my normal life. The ride felt endless. 10 hours of silence. 10 hours of rattling metal, stale heat, and bodies shifting around me in tight quarters. Nobody spoke. Nobody dared. The chain around my wrists rubbed my skin raw. At one point, the woman beside me whispered, "What you do?" Her voice was sandpaper rough. "Nothing," I whispered back. She nodded once as if that made perfect sense. Those are the ones they fear most. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't ask. I just stared out the tiny, barred window, watching highways blur into forests and forests melt into empty fields. The sun died. The moon rose. Someone coughed behind me until it sounded like they were breaking. No one fed us. No one spoke. No one explained. By hour 7, I stopped trying to swallow my panic. It rose up like smoke, filling every corner of me. Maybe this was some bureaucratic nightmare, a mix-up, a typo. Maybe I'd wake up tomorrow in my own bed, laugh about this over pancakes at the diner, tell Myra, you'll never believe the weird week I had. But deep down in the part of myself that had grown up surviving disappointment, I knew this wasn't a mistake. Something was wrong with my identity, something big, something dangerous. And whatever that something was had now swallowed my life whole. We reached the facility just before dawn. High fences, barbed wire, concrete walls that drank the light and spat out the dark. Guards everywhere wearing uniforms I didn't recognize, no city badge, no county emblem. Foreign patches, foreign accents. This wasn't a jail, this was something else. A guard yanked the door open and shouted for us to unload. As I stepped off the bus on shaky legs, dawn bleeding over the horizon like a bruise, a single thought pierced the haze. If this is what happens when the system finds me, what happens when the people behind that system show up? The walls were the color of nothing. A gray so flat and cold it didn't even register as a shade, just an absence. No window. One cot bolted to the floor. One steel toilet with no lid. A flickering light above that hummed like it knew it was the last sound I'd hear before I snapped. I didn't know how long I'd been inside. There was no clock. No guard telling me the schedule. No lawyer, no phone call. Just the sound of my own breathing and the ache in my wrists where the shackles had rubbed the skin raw. Every few hours, or maybe minutes, time had collapsed. I heard footsteps echo outside the door. Sometimes they paused. Sometimes they whispered. I couldn't make out the words, just the rhythm, a hush, and then my name, not shouted, not spoken clearly, just leaked like they wanted me to hear it but not understand it. Ellie, that was the third time. I pressed my ear to the cold metal door but the whisper was already gone, a breeze of syllables left behind like dust. It wasn't like jail. I'd seen jail in movies. There, people shouted, cursed, demanded their rights. This place had no shouting, only silence, heavy and watchful. Like it was waiting for me to unravel. I'd already screamed once. About 2 hours in, maybe 3, I'd banged on the door until my fists hurt. I'm not a criminal, I came in for dental pain, for God's sake. What do you even want from me? No response. Just the lights above, flickering like an answer I couldn't read, so I stopped yelling. It made me feel weak anyway. Instead, I curled on the cot, knees pulled tight, and started thinking about everything I knew. But when I tried to build the story of my life, piece by piece, it collapsed like a house made of wet paper. Birth certificate. Never saw the original. Hospital photos. None. My baby album started at age 3. Childhood stories, always vague. Always starting with, when we got you, got me. From where? I'd never thought to ask. I thought it was just the way some families talked. Adoption was a word I'd never heard in my house. Michael and Marion weren't exactly open about feelings. Now it hit me, maybe that wasn't neglect. Maybe it was cover. You were never ours, Michael had said the night he kicked me out. I thought it was cruelty. Now I wondered if it was the first truth he'd ever spoken. My mouth was dry, I hadn't been offered water. They were starving me slowly and I wasn't sure it was out of malice. It felt strategic. They didn't need me angry, they needed me pliable. I laughed once, just a short, sharp sound that didn't even feel human. You think this'll break me? I whispered to the bulb above. You have no idea what I've survived. I'd slept on diner floors after double shifts. I'd gone without heat through 2 Illinois winters. I'd held my breath through my mother's silence and my father's rage and still made it to graduation. I could survive this. But survival wasn't the hard part. It was the not knowing, the cracks opening in my memories, the growing suspicion that every choice I thought I made, every identity I'd built from scratch, might not have been mine at all. Was my name even Ellie? Was I even American? Was I someone's missing daughter or something worse? The idea that my entire life might have been a cover story, it hit harder than any slap. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw images that didn't belong to me. Cobblestone streets. A woman with my eyes speaking in a language I didn't recognize. A lullaby that wasn't in English but felt familiar, like a melody from another life. Memories that weren't mine, or maybe they were. It was impossible to tell anymore. The footsteps came again. Slower this time. Then just as my head dropped against the wall came the fourth whisper. Not just my name this time, something else. A man's voice, low and urgent. Hold on, Ellie, we're coming. And then silence. The lock clicked hard like it had teeth. I didn't move, I barely breathed. The steel door burst open so fast it hit the wall behind it, a sharp bang breaking the hours of sterile silence. I scrambled to sit up on the cot, blinking against the light pouring in from the corridor. But what entered wasn't a guard or a cop, it was a man. Maybe mid-30s. Tall, deliberate in his movements, wearing a navy blue coat that looked out of place in this place, like it belonged on the steps of a courthouse, not in a concrete prison hallway. Behind him, two officers with unfamiliar badges followed closely, but he was the one in charge. That much was obvious by the way they stepped aside when he passed. His eyes found mine instantly, blue, sharp, full of fire. "Remove her shackles," he barked. The guards hesitated. I said now. They moved. Before I could speak, before I could form any of the 1,000 questions threatening to claw their way out of my throat, the cold metal cuffs were gone, my wrists suddenly light and raw. The man stepped closer and knelt slightly so he could look me straight in the eye. "You don't know me," he said quietly. "But my name is Luca, I'm your brother." I stared at him. He didn't wait for my reaction. He reached out not to touch but to steady, offering his hand like someone reaching into deep water. "I know you're scared, you have every right to be, but you're not staying here another second." His voice was smooth, but his jaw was tight. He was angry, not at me for me. I blinked. "What what is happening?" Luca's mouth twitched, something between a smile and heartbreak. "You were taken, a long time ago, but you're not alone anymore. Come." I should have asked more. I should have resisted, questioned, demanded proof, something. But instead, I stood up and let him guide me out of the cell like a sleepwalker. We walked down a hallway of glassy-eyed guards and doors that all looked like mine. No one tried to stop us. Luca opened the back door of a sleek black SUV parked outside the gate. "Get in," he said. I hesitated just long enough for the doubt to creep in. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" I asked. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small photograph, worn, creased down the middle. He handed it to me, a woman holding a baby. Her dark hair tucked under a wool scarf, her eyes my eyes, same cheekbones, same quiet sorrow. The baby wore a knitted blue hat. I didn't have to ask who that was. "We've been looking for you ever since," Luca said, voice low. "You weren't abandoned, you were lost." My knees went weak, but I nodded and slid into the car. As we pulled away, the facility growing smaller in the rearview mirror, the silence between us settled like a thin layer of snow, gentle but covering something heavy underneath. I turned toward the window, forehead resting on the glass. "Why now?" I whispered. Luca didn't answer right away. "Because someone finally made a mistake. They logged you into the system, and that triggered every alarm we set." I didn't ask who he was. Not yet. I just sat in the warmth of the car, trying to thaw the fear still stuck to my bones. The highway stretched in front of us like a ribbon through pine-covered hills, quiet and winding. I'd stopped asking where we were going, somewhere around the third turn. The low hum of the engine and the cold air whispering through the cracked window felt safer than anything I'd known in days. Luca drove with the kind of focus that came from habit, left hand on the wheel, right resting near the gearshift, knuckles pale from tension he hadn't voiced yet. He hadn't said much since we pulled out of the facility, but when he finally spoke, it wasn't small talk. "You were born in Prague." I turned slowly to face him. He kept his eyes on the road. "We're 2 months old when you vanished." It was 1998, right after the final handover of records from the Ministry of Interior. Things were chaotic. Paperwork was being transferred to the new system. Files were duplicated, some were corrupted, he paused. Some were lost on purpose. I leaned back against the seat, my body suddenly too warm despite the chill. "You're saying I was taken, like kidnapped?" Luca shook his head. "You weren't stolen in the night. It was messier than that. You were supposed to go to a foster home temporarily, just until our mother got out of the hospital. She'd suffered complications, and our father, he was already gone by then." I stared at him, lips parting. "Gone, assassinated," Luca said plainly. "He was a journalist. Not the kind with a pen and notebook, the kind with encrypted drives and enemies in high places." I blinked at the windshield. That wasn't a past. That was a spy novel. "The day they transferred you, the social worker logged the wrong name. Wrong file. You ended up in a batch of international placements meant for American adoptions. Infants under a year old. No red flags were raised because your original ID was buried under 10 layers of bureaucracy." His voice grew softer. "One day you were in our mother's arms. The next you were gone. They told her you died of sudden illness." My chest felt tight. "They lied to her?" I asked. "They lied to everyone," Luca said. "When the truth came out a year later, no one could trace where you'd gone. The adoption agency that processed your paperwork dissolved a month later. The files were incomplete. And the ones that survived had your name spelled wrong. Ellie wasn't even my name. I wanted to ask what it really was, but I couldn't get the words out. Instead, I looked down at the photo in my lap. The woman holding the baby, the scarf, the eyes. She looks like me. Luca glanced over briefly, his expression unreadable. She never stopped believing you were alive. She spent every dime, every favor chasing rumors. When she died, she left the search to me. Silence settled between us again, but this time it didn't feel empty. It felt sacred. She named me Aliska, I said quietly, the syllables tasting unfamiliar but real, like a song half remembered from a dream. Luca nodded once. Aliska Marie Novikova, daughter of Jana Novikova and Tomas Petric. I turned to the window, watching pine trees blur past in streaks of green and gray. There were no answers out there, but I couldn't look at him, not yet. I was afraid if I did, I'd cry. And I didn't want to waste tears when so much more was coming. So I stared ahead, a ghost in someone else's name, trying to remember who I used to be. The estate didn't feel real. It rose from the hillside like something out of a painting, gabled windows, stone balconies tangled with ivy, the vineyard sloping down behind it in neat, endless rows. Birds flitted past as if this place had always known peace. But I hadn't. Even as Luca led me up the front steps and a woman in smart, all-black clothes greeted us with a whispered Vitage demain, welcome home, I couldn't bring myself to believe any of it. Home was a word I didn't trust anymore. Inside, the air smelled like cedar and sun-warmed paper. Luca took me through a quiet hallway into what must have once been a library, high ceilings, dusty books. A long wooden table with a single folder resting on it. He opened it carefully. Our mother left this for you, he said. The original will, last revised 6 months before she died. I stared down at the unfamiliar handwriting. Her name. My name. Legal terms that didn't feel tethered to reality. Then the words that stopped everything. All properties, accounts, and holdings are to pass solely to my daughter, Aliska Marie Novikova, upon her return. Luca has agreed to act as steward until that time. My breath hitched. Luca tapped the signature. It's already been verified in court. I don't understand, I whispered. I didn't even know her. But she knew you, he said, and she never gave up. The room blurred for a second. I blinked hard, willing the tears not to come. It was too much. The silence, the kindness, the impossible truth that someone somewhere had been waiting for me all this time. She gave me all this, I asked. She gave you back your name, the rest is just what came with it. I traced the edge of the folder. It was all too quiet, too still, like the universe was holding its breath, and then it exhaled. Luca's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, then cursed under his breath in Czech. What is it? He hesitated. Tell me. He turned the phone so I could see the video paused mid-frame. Michael and Marion, sitting in what looked like a lawyer's office. Michael's face flushed with anger, Marion's pale and pinched, hands folded like she was preparing to mourn someone she couldn't name. Press play, I said. He did. Marion's voice came first. We raised her, we fed her, we clothed her, we deserve something. Michael leaned in, eyes hard. She owes us. She left us with nothing. She has no right to cut us off like this. Then came the line that made my stomach drop. We're filing a legal claim for alimony. She lived under our roof. She owes us for raising her. I recoiled from the screen like it had burned me. My throat clenched. They're suing me. They're trying, Luca said evenly. The papers just came in. I could hardly breathe. I was 18 when they threw me out. I had nothing. They're claiming you ran away, that they paid for your education, that they sacrificed their lives for you. A sharp laugh burst out of me. It was ugly, hollow. I was working nights at 15 just to buy my own food. I washed dishes so they wouldn't say I ate for free. I wanted to scream. Luca's voice cut through the fury like a blade. They are not going to win. Then, as if summoned by the gods of gall and irony, his phone buzzed again. A new notification. A live call. He answered, put it on speaker. It was them. Michael's voice thundered through the room. So this is how you treat the people who raised you. You think you're better than us now. Marion's tone was sickly sweet, like she'd coached herself for the part. Ileana, sweetheart, we just want what's fair. Ellie, Aliska, I wasn't theirs anymore. I never had been. I stepped closer to the phone. You left me in the street with a duffel bag and a bruise on my cheek, I said, voice cold. Now you want compensation. We made you who you are, Michael growled. You owe us everything. No, I said. I survived in spite of you. There was silence. Then the call dropped. Luca turned to me, one eyebrow raised. You're shaking. I'm fine. He studied me for a moment, then nodded once. Let's bury them in truth. The folder on the table grew heavier by the hour. Not physically, it was still just paper and staples and time-worn ink, but emotionally it was a weight I could feel in my hands, in my spine, in my chest. Are you sure this is enough? I asked, flipping through the eviction letter one more time, the date circled in red. Luca leaned forward from the other side of the dining table. His sleeves were rolled up, his dark hair slightly mussed from running his hand through it too many times. It's not just enough, he said. It's damning. Beside him sat our attorney, a woman named Clara who looked like she'd personally sued half of Europe into submission. She was all quiet fire, with wire-rimmed glasses and a voice that could cut marble. Their claim hinges on the narrative that they supported you into adulthood, she said. We dismantle that piece by piece. I nodded, sliding a small, tattered notebook toward her. The pages were bent, smudged, and streaked with pencil lines from years ago. My handwriting looked younger, shakier, but the pain inside it was still sharp. Clara read aloud from the top page, February 19th. He threw my bag at my feet, told me to take care of myself. Mom didn't say a word. I walked until my toes went numb. Don't know where I'll sleep tonight. My jaw clenched. I wrote it that night, I said. I didn't have a phone. This was all I had to prove anything back then. Clara flipped through more pages. Rent stubs, diner shift notes, grocery lists on the backs of receipts, and then tucked in the middle a copy of a paycheck from the diner dated 3 weeks after I turned 18. You were supporting yourself within a month, Luca murmured. I looked up at him. I'd been saving before that, since 15, tips mostly. I just never thought I'd have to, you know. Use it. Clara slid everything back into the folder and tapped the cover. We'll present it chronologically. Start with a letter, then your journal, then financial proof. Paint a picture. A picture of abandonment, I said. Clara's gaze sharpened. No, a picture of resilience. Let them try to twist it. I dare them. Luca pushed a sealed envelope toward me. There's also this. I opened it slowly. Inside was a printed email thread, one I'd never seen before. It was between Michael and a landlord. We won't be renewing the lease. The girl's out as of the 20th, she's not our responsibility anymore. I stared at the date. 3 days before they threw me out, they'd planned it. Luca's voice was quiet but firm. I had someone pull archived communications. This one was still recoverable. I swallowed hard. He told me it was my fault, that he didn't want to do it. He said I left him no choice. He lied, Luca said. I know, I whispered. But it still burns. Clara stood and gathered the documents. We'll file everything by morning. The hearing's been expedited. They wanted a quick win. They're about to get something else. Later that night, I sat alone in the vineyard under a sky so white it made me dizzy. I thought about that freezing night in Illinois. About the way the air stung my cheeks and the streetlights flickered as I walked with my duffel bag and my silence. I remembered how it felt to curl on a borrowed floor with $23 in my pocket and no idea what tomorrow would look like. And now here I was, the same girl, but not. Luca stepped out quietly and sat beside me, hands tucked into his coat pockets. I always imagined you'd have my mom's laugh, he said suddenly. I smiled faintly. Do I? He looked over. Not yet, but it's in there. We sat like that for a while, quiet, grounded, ready. Because in a few days I'd face the people who tried to erase me. And this time I wouldn't whisper. The courtroom wasn't majestic. It smelled faintly of burnt coffee and cleaning fluid, and the fluorescent lights above flickered like they were nervous for me. But I wasn't, not anymore. I sat beside Clara at the polished oak table, papers stacked neatly, every corner squared off. Luca sat directly behind me, calm and unreadable, hands clasped in his lap. I didn't need to look back to feel his presence. It grounded me. Across the room, Michael and Marian entered like they were owed something. Michael walked like the floor should part for him. Marian wore a pale pink cardigan and clutched a crumpled tissue like she might cry at any moment. I knew better. They hadn't seen me yet. Then they did, and Michael smirked. Like this was going to be easy. Like he still believed no one would ever believe me. The judge entered. A gavel dropped once. And the trial began. Their lawyer stood first, middle-aged, polite, with the tired look of someone who'd repped more petty family lawsuits than he cared to count. My clients raised Ms. Matthews since infancy, he said smoothly. They provided her food, clothing, shelter, and emotional support. Now that she's inherited a significant estate, they are seeking reimbursement for their years of care. He paused just long enough to let that word sink in, care. My fingers tightened slightly under the table. Clara stood next. With respect, she began, we intend to prove that my client was evicted at 18, left financially unsupported, and has no legal or moral obligation to pay a cent. The plaintiffs did not provide ongoing care. They provided abandonment. Then she sat. The judge looked at Michael. Mr. Matthews, did you at any point force the defendant out of your home? Michael leaned forward. No, sir, she ran away. She was always difficult. We did our best. And do you have any documentation proving you supported her after she turned 18? We weren't that kind of family, Marion chimed in, her voice barely above a whisper. We didn't keep receipts. Clara rose again, holding up the eviction letter. This is dated February 20th, signed by Mr. Matthews. It clearly states that Eliana Ellie was no longer their responsibility and would be removed from the lease. She turned 18 2 days before this was sent. She handed it to the clerk. Then came the journal. Clara's voice softened. We'd like to submit a personal journal entry written the night she was forced out. The judge skimmed the copy. Read aloud. He threw my bag on the floor, told me to take care of myself. Mom didn't say a word. The courtroom was so still, I could hear the clock tick above the door. Clara pressed on. We also have dated receipts of Ellie paying her own rent, utilities, and food within 1 month of that eviction, despite being a full-time high school student working nights at a diner. We have no evidence of financial support from the plaintiffs. But we do have this. She laid the email thread on the table. Michael's email to the landlord. She's out as of the 20th, not our responsibility anymore. Clara looked up at the judge, her voice clear. They knew what they were doing. They lied under oath. Michael stood suddenly. We fed her, we clothed her, we gave her a roof. Until it didn't suit you anymore, I said, loud enough for every head in the courtroom to turn. The judge's eyes met mine. Do you wish to speak, Ms. Matthews? I rose. My name is Aliska Novikova, I said. But for most of my life I was Ellie Matthews. I lived in that house, yes, but I was never really seen in it. I looked directly at Marion. Her hands trembled. You told me I was difficult. Too opinionated, too independent. You made me feel like love had conditions, like I had to earn my place every day. Then I turned to Michael. And when I stopped pleasing you, you didn't sit down with me. You didn't ask why I was working nights at 15. You didn't listen. You threw my life out with a single sentence, take care of yourself. I let the silence hang. Now you want payment, not for love, but for control. And you don't get to rewrite what happened just because I finally have something you want. I sat down. The judge didn't speak for a moment, then he leaned forward. The claim for reimbursement is denied. The court finds no evidence that Ms. Matthews, Ms. Novikova, owes the plaintiffs any financial obligation. In fact, the evidence suggests emotional and legal abandonment. He slammed the gavel once. Case closed. Michael stood too fast. Marion clutched her tissue and wouldn't meet my eyes. As they shuffled out, Luca leaned forward in the bench behind me and said quietly, so only I could hear, "Come after her again and we'll bury you legally." They didn't look back. We didn't speak in the car. Luca drove with the windows cracked just enough to let in the early autumn breeze, and I let the silence stretch across the seats between us. But this silence wasn't heavy, it was sacred. Like we'd finally stepped out of a tunnel that took years to crawl through. My hands rested on my lap, fingers still trembling slightly from the adrenaline. My heart hadn't caught up yet. My body was no longer in fight mode, but my mind still wore armor. I glanced out the window as we crossed the border back into the hills near the estate. I hadn't noticed before how beautiful the countryside was. Maybe it had always been. Or maybe I was just seeing clearly for the first time. Luca pulled onto the gravel drive and cut the engine. The house stood quiet, golden light spilling from its windows. Home, not because it had pillars or land or marble floors, but because I was allowed to exist in it fully, without performance, without shrinking. He looked over at me, a faint smile on his lips. You did it. I shook my head, still stunned. We did it, he nodded. But you stood there, you told the truth out loud, you looked them in the eye. I blinked hard and looked away. It still doesn't feel real. He didn't rush me. Just stepped out of the car, walked around to my door, and opened it like we had all the time in the world. I stood on the terrace while Luca poured tea. The vineyard below shimmered in the evening light. Somewhere down in the vines, a bird called out once and then fell quiet, like it too was letting the day settle. I never thought justice would feel like this, I murmured. Like what? Like peace, not victory, just the absence of fear. Luca passed me a cup, and with it, a thin envelope. I glanced up, one brow raised. Final confirmation, he said. Your name is restored in every registry, every database, every record. I traced the edge of the envelope with my thumb. Inside was paperwork that said I was Eliska Marie Novikova, daughter of Jana, sister of Luca, no longer a ghost in someone else's story. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. It felt different from all the other exhales before. This one was full, deep, final. I feel free, I whispered. Luca clinked his teacup gently against mine. Then let this be your first evening as yourself. We didn't toast. We didn't cheer. We just stood there sipping tea, watching the last light pour over the vineyard like honey. I wasn't a runaway anymore. I wasn't an abandoned child. I wasn't a lie someone tried to bury. I was Eliska, and I was finally home. It came on a Thursday morning, tucked neatly between a stack of estate documents and a forgotten pastry delivery. In white envelope. No stamp, no fanfare. I almost didn't notice it until Luca slid it across the breakfast table. This one's yours, he said, smiling softly. I stared at it for a long second. It wasn't big. It wasn't sealed with wax or wrapped in ribbon. But I felt its weight before I even touched it because this was the one. The one that meant it was over. I opened it slowly, careful not to tear the edges. Inside was a letter printed on government stationery. Clean, official. Dry in tone, but beautiful in its finality. To Eliska Marie Novikova, this letter confirms the reinstatement of your birth identity, citizenship, and all legal rights previously lost due to clerical and procedural errors in the international foster and adoption system. You are hereby recognized, without restriction, as the rightful heir and citizen of record. All prior entries under the name Ellie Matthews will remain sealed for historical reference only. It was signed, stamped, dated. It was done, no more dual lives, no more questions, no more ghosts. I placed the letter gently on the table and sat back, letting it sink in. I was whole again, or maybe for the first time. Later, I walked out onto the vineyard path alone. The leaves had begun to crisp around the edges, autumn stretching gently into the hills. There was something quiet about the season here, not mournful, just reflective. At the far end of the property, where the view opened wide toward the hills and the rooftops of the neighboring village, I stopped and took out my phone. There were no voicemails. No texts from the past clawing at my present. Just a blank screen, mine to fill however I wanted. For so long, I'd moved through the world like I was temporary. Like I had to be cautious with everything I touched, jobs, friendships, apartments, because none of it really belonged to me. Now it did, all of it. My name, my story, my space on this earth. That night, Luca and I sat beside the fireplace in the sitting room, the estate quiet around us. No staff, no meetings, just the soft sound of crackling wood and tea cooling between our hands. He broke the silence first. You know, he said, when I was 15, I used to imagine this moment, what it would feel like to bring you home. I looked at him. Was it like this? I asked. He smiled. No, it's better because you're not just back, you're you. And you're not lost anymore. My throat tightened unexpectedly. I didn't think I could ever feel safe, I said, voice low. Not really, not in my bones, but today I did. For a second I did. That's enough for now, he said gently. The rest will come. I nodded, blinking away tears before they could fall. She would have liked this room, don't you think? Our mother, he asked. I nodded again. She would have filled it with plants and books and the kind of coffee that's always too strong, he said with a small laugh. And yes, she would have loved seeing you here. I let the silence settle again, not out of grief, but gratitude. Because after all the courts and cells and questions, after all the lies and the shouting and the sleepless nights, this was the part no one talks about. The part where you just get to be. 3 years later, I stood behind a microphone in a hall lined with gold trim and quiet eyes. The European Council on Adoption Reform had gathered survivors, lawmakers, and activists from across the continent. I was the final speaker. My hands didn't shake. I wore no makeup, no armor, just a silver pin on my lapel with my mother's initials engraved on it. Good morning, I began steady. My name is Eliska Marie Novikova. For most of my life, I didn't know that. A murmur passed through the audience, familiar shock, recognition. I was raised under a false name. Told a false story. And when I was no longer useful to the people who claimed me, I was discarded quietly, legally, and without question. I paused, let that sink in. But I found the truth, and I found my voice. I looked toward the second row. Lucas sat there, proud still. On his lap sat a framed photo of our mother, the same one from the worn picture he'd shown me in the car. She was smiling in it, brighter than I remembered. I turned back to the audience. I don't share my story for pity. I share it because systems like the one that erased me still exist. They still lose children. They still hide pain in paperwork. The lights overhead warmed my face. I got lucky, but this shouldn't require luck. It should require transparency, oversight, humanity. Applause came softly at first, then steadier. I was once just a girl with a duffel bag and no name, I said. Now I help others find theirs. And with that, I stepped down, not broken, not bitter, just home in every sense of the word. Thank you for walking this journey with Aliska. What part of her story spoke to you most? Leave a comment below. I'd love to know where you're watching from and what you would have done.